Good evening. Tensions escalate as the conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies, with strikes reported on both sides.
Tonight, the Middle East stands on the edge of a wider war. Israel launches devastating strikes targeting Iran's energy infrastructure. Massive explosions reported near key oil facilities around Tehran. Iran responds with a chilling warning. New missile systems are ready, and retaliation could extend far beyond Israel's borders. Meanwhile, Gulf states, long trying to stay out of the conflict, are now on high alert as missile attacks and drone strikes reach their territory. From Tehran to Tel Aviv, from Riyadh to the Strait of Hormuz, the conflict between Israel and Iran is rapidly expanding into a regional crisis that could reshape global energy markets and security for years to come. Tonight, we break down what happened, how the conflict escalated, and what could come next. The latest escalation began when Israeli forces launched a series of coordinated strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure. According to regional reports, Israeli aircraft struck oil depots and fuel storage facilities near Tehran, triggering massive fires and thick black smoke visible across the capital. Several oil workers were reportedly killed, and fuel distribution across the city was temporarily disrupted. Israeli officials say the strikes were designed to weaken Iran's military logistics and reduce the resources available for missile production and drone operations. But targeting energy infrastructure represents a dramatic escalation. Oil facilities are among the most strategic and dangerous targets in any conflict. Iran is one of the world's largest oil producers, and attacks on its energy network risk shaking global markets. Indeed, analysts say oil prices surged above $100 per barrel following the latest wave of strikes, fueling fears of a global energy crisis. For Israel, however, the calculation is simple: weaken Iran's ability to finance and sustain war. Iran's response came quickly and with a clear message. Iranian officials warned that new long-range missile systems could soon be deployed if Israeli strikes continue. The country's Revolutionary Guard said regional oil facilities and military bases could become targets if the conflict escalates further. This warning is particularly alarming because Iran has already demonstrated its ability to strike beyond Israel. Over the past days, Iranian missiles and drones have been launched not only toward Israeli territory, but also toward locations across the Gulf region. The attacks represent a major shift in strategy. For years, Iran relied primarily on proxy groups across the Middle East. But now Tehran appears willing to engage more directly, launching missiles from its own territory and threatening critical infrastructure across the region. Perhaps the most dramatic development is the widening of the conflict beyond Israel and Iran. Gulf states that once tried to remain neutral are now directly affected. Air defense systems have been activated across several countries, including the United Arab Emirates. Authorities in Abu Dhabi declared a high alert after detecting potential aerial threats linked to the escalating war. The warning reflects growing fears that missiles, drones, or debris from intercepts could threaten civilian populations. Meanwhile, Iran has also launched attacks targeting energy infrastructure and military sites across the Gulf. Missile and drone strikes have been reported in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and other regional locations. These strikes have damaged refineries and military facilities while forcing governments across the Gulf to scramble their air defenses. The situation has forced regional leaders to reconsider their position in the conflict. For years, Gulf nations attempted a delicate balancing act, maintaining relations with both Washington and Tehran. Now that strategy may no longer be possible. Beyond the immediate military confrontation, another critical concern looms: global energy supply. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping routes on Earth, is now at the center of the crisis. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway. Iran has warned that shipping through the strait could be restricted if attacks against the country continue. Already, tanker traffic in the region has been disrupted. Several ships have been damaged by drones and explosions near key ports. In one incident, an oil tanker was attacked near Oman, killing a crew member and injuring several others. Insurance premiums for vessels entering the region have skyrocketed, and some shipping companies are now reconsidering routes. If the Strait of Hormuz were fully closed, the consequences could ripple across the entire global economy. Energy prices would surge, fuel shortages could emerge, and the economic shock could affect countries far beyond the Middle East. While the world focuses on the oil strikes, the broader conflict continues to intensify. Israeli warplanes have reportedly launched dozens of strikes against Iranian military installations and missile sites. At the same time, Iranian forces have fired repeated missile barrages toward Israeli territory. The fighting is also also spilled into other regions. In Lebanon, clashes involving Iranian-backed groups have intensified, and across Iraq and Syria, military bases linked to the United States have been placed on heightened alert. The conflict now involves multiple actors and multiple battlefields, and that complexity makes the situation extremely unpredictable. The military confrontation is unfolding alongside a dramatic political development inside Iran. Following the death of Iran's longtime supreme leader during earlier Israeli strikes, the country's assembly of experts appointed Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late leader, as the new supreme leader. The move marks the first hereditary succession in the history of the Islamic Republic. Supporters say Mojtaba Khamenei has strong ties with the Revolutionary Guard and will ensure continuity during wartime. But critics argue the appointment risks deepening political divisions within Iran. Some fear the leadership change could push the country toward even more aggressive military actions. Others believe it could eventually lead to internal instability if the conflict continues. Although Israel has led many of the recent strikes, the United States remains deeply involved in the crisis. American forces across the region have been placed on high alert. Several embassies are preparing evacuation plans as tensions escalate. International reactions have been mixed. Some governments support Israel's efforts to weaken Iran's military capabilities. Others warn that attacks on oil infrastructure risk triggering a global economic crisis. European leaders have called for maximum restraint, urging both sides to avoid actions that could ignite a broader regional war. But diplomatic solutions appear increasingly difficult as each new strike triggers another wave of retaliation. Behind the military strategies and geopolitical calculations lies a growing human tragedy. Hundreds of people have already been killed across the region since the conflict escalated. Thousands more have been injured. Entire communities in parts of Lebanon and Israel have been forced to evacuate. And in Iran, civilians are increasingly feeling the effects of fuel shortages and infrastructure damage. Across the Middle East, fear and uncertainty are spreading. Air raid sirens, missile alerts, and emergency warnings have become part of daily life. For many families, the question is no longer who will win, but how much destruction the region will endure before the fighting stops. Perhaps the biggest unanswered question is whether Gulf nations will eventually join the fight directly. So far, most have limited their actions to defensive measures, intercepting missiles and protecting infrastructure, but that could change if attacks continue. Some regional governments have warned that further strikes on their territory could trigger direct military retaliation. If that happens, the conflict could transform into a full-scale regional war involving multiple armies and alliances. Such a scenario would be one of the most dangerous geopolitical crises of the modern era. So what comes next? Military analysts say three possible scenarios are emerging. First, the conflict could continue as a cycle of strikes and counterstrikes, gradually escalating but remaining limited. Second, Gulf states could enter the conflict directly, dramatically expanding the battlefield. Or third, international pressure could force both sides back to negotiations before the situation spirals out of control. At the moment, none of these outcomes seem guaranteed. What is clear, however, is that the stakes could not be higher. The Middle East sits at the heart of global energy supply. And any prolonged war in the region could have consequences felt across the entire world. Tonight, the Middle East stands closer to regional war than at any time in recent years. Israeli strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure, Iran's threats of new missile attacks, and Gulf states now caught in the crossfire as the conflict spreads across borders and battlefield, says the world is watching and waiting to see whether diplomacy can prevent an even larger catastrophe. For now, the missiles continue to fly, and the future of the region remains dangerously uncertain. Stay with us for continuing coverage.